Hello everybody, my name is Jon Linnell. I'm a full-stack JavaScript developer at ThirdBridge. My team works on various Node and React-based platforms, lots of which are kind of internal to facilitate our business workings, but some of the more major projects have been client-facing too, and those are the really fun ones to work on. So I don't think many people outside of the industry will have heard of ThirdBridge. To be honest, I hadn't until they hired me, but they play a really important role in the world of global finance. So ThirdBridge puts investors in touch with industry experts to help them make the best investment decisions. Basically, we connect people who have lots of money to invest but not sure where to invest it with industry and area specialists with loads of experience and expertise to help with their decisions. There's a little bit more to it than that, and our marketing team would probably not appreciate my rather infantile explanation, but I'm not sure they're going to be watching. So this is a slightly different format than I was expecting. I was kind of expecting to be up on stage talking to anywhere between 20 and 100 developers eating pizza and drinking beer. But instead, I am in my house talking to myself. And it's all a little bit weird, so I hope you'll bear with me for this. So without any more ado, let's just jump straight into the question. Is Redux dead? No. Wait, hang on. Yes. Not really. Yes, kind of, but maybe it is. But probably not. Right? This is all kind of a bit complicated, but it's also a not very well phrased question to begin with. If you've been on developer internet or Twitter at all in the last year or two, the question, is Redux dead, has been circulating on the internet for a while. And the only reason we're even asking this specific question in these specific terms is because the JavaScript community, much as I love it, and I really do, can be a little bit prone to clickbait and jumping on bandwagons. So controversial and reductive headlines get a lot of traction on Medium and Hacker Noon and other sources of digital detritus, and for good reason. They shock us, they challenge us and our beliefs and our competence as engineers. Like, if an article pops up in your feed entitled 10 reasons why you're using the map function wrong, the author is luring you in with some clickbait that jabs you in the self-confidence and says, hey, you call yourself a developer, but are you the kind of idiot who'd misuse the map function? The reality is that you're probably doing fine. Like, this is just sensationalist rubbish. They're trying to draw you in for clicks and stuff. So, you know, don't believe everything you see on the internet, because it might not be helpful, useful, or even true. Exercise some common sense, some critical thinking, and despite whatever people on Hacker Noon tell you, you're probably doing fine. Right, that's enough of my opinions. I'll just climb down off of my soapbox now. Thank you for listening to me waffle. So this is a difficult question, but as with all, populist rhetoric in the world at large, there is usually a grain of truth or some undercurrent that has led us to ask such a simplistic question. So before we can answer this question, or try to, we need to do a little bit of a history recap. What is Redux? Where did it come from? Why do we use it? So ostensibly, Redux is a state management library. It allows us to describe application state as a series of plain objects, describe updates to that state as more plain objects, and use pure functions to describe how the state should change. Although you can use Redux with almost anything, Angular, Vanilla.js, you could even use it with jQuery if you really wanted to, but I don't really recommend that. It works really well with React on a sort of conceptual level. They're both quite highly functional in design, and they promote unidirectional data flows in your applications. In React land, we use it for solving one of the oldest anti-patterns in React applications, prop drilling. You have some piece of state all the way at the top of your component tree, and a bunch of nested components need to know about that bit of state. How do you get it there? You drill it down through the props, component by component, parent to child, knitting your app together tighter and tighter with each level. Redux allows you to avoid this, and that all sounds great, but why do we hate it? It's hard. This is a bad example. This is from this is a bit more of a complicated application, and I actually ran out of space trying to fit this on my screen. There's more to it than this. It's hard. It's traditionally difficult to boilerplate. It requires a lot of extra stuff to do basically anything at all. The learning curve is regarded as being pretty steep, and until quite recently in React terms, it was largely unavoidable if you wanted to develop a front-end app to any degree of scale or complexity. So why do people think it's dead? Apart from wishful thinking. In a word, context. In React 16.3, I think it was, the context API in its current incarnation was released, and it solved the prop drilling question like that. Immediately, with just a provider, a consumer, some render props, you could pass data from the top of your app all the way down to an arbitrary number of consumers anywhere in your component tree. There's a reason everyone jumped on context as soon as the new API came out. It solves a common problem, much like Redux does, but it solves it in a much simpler way. And it does so with a minimal learning curve. And that's just not something Redux can claim to do. Like, I'm sure some of us will have had projects in years gone by before 16.3 when at some point we've looked at our data and we've looked at our component trees and we've said, oh, fudge, I have to use Redux. And then you spend the next 4 hours building your reducers and creating your stores, writing action creators, committing 15,000 lines of code at 4 in the morning and realizing that you got your enums wrong or that you can't dispatching your action creators correctly. And then you can't figure out why you didn't prefix your connector function with on, nothing works, and you throw your laptop in the canal because you just want to condemn that abomination to the depths where no one can see it and it can't hurt anyone ever again. Or is that just me? Context solves that problem. And it solves it in an obvious, easy way. It got even better with the use context hook, which makes working with context even easier and even more syntactically sugary. So, are hooks and context enough? Many seem to think that the bell tolled for Redux with that release. Immediately, one of the major use cases of the library was subsumed by a reasonably clean, built-in API that anybody could leverage with a minimal amount of pain or effort. Like, if you just want to pass some basic data that doesn't change down through your component tree, this is the way to do it. Seriously, I'm a firm believer in the right tool for the right job. Hooks and context are great for passing things like theme data, like app-wide configuration and so on, down through the tree. But when you want to manage global state on a large scale, with asynchronicity, collating multiple stores, rapidly changing data, data structures with middleware and so on, that's when context starts to fall flat. You also don't have one thing that I absolutely love in Redux, which is the time-traveling debugger. If you believe that your UI is a function of state, then being able to see the changes affecting your UI in a scrubbable, time-travelable sort of way is absolutely invaluable. It's a really powerful tool, and it's not something I've seen elsewhere. Context and hooks are great for some use cases, but not all. You will probably still find yourself reluctantly reaching for Redux at some point or other. It's historically been a colossal pain in the neck to use. But is that still the case? One would hope that in the marketplace of JavaScript ideas, which I guess is a thing, the Redux community would see the simplicity of these sometime alternatives and up their game a bit. And in a way they have. Redux Toolkit came out a couple of months ago, and it introduces a lot of really cool things that just make dealing with Redux so much easier. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these in extreme detail. You can have a look at the documentation yourself because it's really easy. It's so much nicer than Redux used to be, in my opinion. So it does all the same stuff, but it just does it for you. Their strapline is the official, opinionated, batteries included toolset for efficient Redux development, and that just sounds so good to me. Let's just have a quick look at some of these. We've got Configure Store, which some of you may recognize. It looks a bit like Create Store, but it simplifies the bootstrapping procedure. It gives you this configuration object that you can use for handling reducers and middlewares and dev tools and stuff like that. That's really cool. It gives you a couple of little helper functions like Create Reducer, which allows you to create a sort of object map or lookup table for your reducers for specific bits of state, which is nice. We have a helper function for creating action creators, but the thing that is a real game changer for me is the Create Slice function, and that is what I want to demo right now. Okay, so I've got a super basic React app that I flung together with Parcel, which is a really nice alternative to Webpack, I guess, especially for small projects. You should check it out. We've got our basic app. We've got our template. We've got our index page, which is just a really basic React app. I've got a counter and some buttons, and that's these. I've got some buttons and a counter. And this is what the page looks like. So we've got an increment button and a decrement button. At the moment, there is no store. If I go on my Redux store, there's nothing here. So let's say I want to hook these buttons up to this counter. Now, obviously I can do this with a proper orchestration of local state. I don't really need Redux for this. You can do this out of the box with React. But bear with me, it's a demo. My choices were either extreme simplicity or extreme complexity. And I went for extreme simplicity because I'm a simple man. So let's hook this up. Let's use Redux Toolkit to bootstrap Redux in this project. So I'm going to shoot over to my terminal here. I'm going to yarn add React Redux and Redux.js package toolkit. And that should download these. Right. Now, I left myself a very helpful reminder to start here in the store. So I've kind of already added this file. So let's get to it. Let's get rid of that. Import configure store. So this is that help function I mentioned earlier from Redux Toolkit. Let's define our store equals configure store. And here we get to provide our configuration option. So I'm going to first add some reducers. So we're going to need one for our counter. I'll explain what this means in just a minute. I've got to get my syntax right. I will explore that. Right, where does counter slice come from? Redux Toolkit encourages you to think about your store as slices of state. So that's what we're going to do here. I've got this counter slice, which I will import from slices counter. Now I need to actually create this now. So new folder, slices, new file, counter.js. Lovely. So what we want to do here is create a new slice of our store, a new slice of state. So we're going to bring in create slice from Redux Toolkit, and we'll initialize a counter slice. I will say counter slice an awful lot in this demo. Right, name. Let's give it a nice human readable name like counter. Initial state can be 0. And now our reducers. If you've used Redux before, you'll be beginning to understand why this is so exciting. So we're going to define two reducers here for handling new state changes. We'll have one to increment the counter, so state +1, and we'll have one to decrement the state. Is that right? No, that's not right. There we go. State -1. There we go. Make that usable. Okay, that's it. That's our state slice defined. We've got our name, we've got our initial states, and we've got our reducers. What this function will do is create action creators for us as well. It won't create selectors, so I'm just going to quickly add a selector function that we can use later on for grabbing this out of our state. There we go. Save all of those. And that is just not updated yet. Fantastic. All right, we're getting there. So the next thing that I'm going to need to do is add our provider. So I'm going to pop on over to the index. I'm going to import provider from Redux. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and encompass the whole app in this because I'm not really that fussed about best practices right now. I'll have it automatically include the store. Fantastic. And we'll pop that there. Got to get the indentation right. Okay. So Let me just save that. And if I pop back to our demo now and refresh the page, you will see in the Redux DevTools that we have our state, our counter. These still don't do anything, so let's hook those up. If I go into, in fact, first, let's just get rid of that. We'll set the counter up. So import use selector. And those of you who haven't used Redux for a couple of years, that's right, React Redux now has hooks, which is just super nice. So let's pop that out of there. Const count equals use selector, and we're going to bring in the get count from the slice that I defined a few minutes ago. And now, with a little bit of luck, there we go, 0. So let's hook up those buttons. Imports, we'll import another hook from React Redux called use dispatch from React Redux. And const dispatch. We need to create that dispatch. Right. Now we need to bring in our state. Now we need to bring in our slice of state. So import counter slice from store slices counter. And there's a reason we're doing this. What I want to do is use the actions that were automatically generated, the action creators, sorry, that were automatically generated by create slice. So these buttons both take a handle click argument. So I'm just going to write that in now. Handle click. We want that to dispatch an action. So counter slice actions increment. I've got to check these right around. Yep. Okay. And you want to call those to get the object back. Right. That should be it. Let's have a look. It is it. There we go. So with just a few lines of code, I've managed to hook up my dispatch function with those buttons and update the store. And you can see here in the Redux DevTools, these are changing nicely. Okay, so a quick recap. I've created a store in a few lines of code. I've created an object that describes how that store changes and what it looks like. And I've had some like basic reducers in here as well. I've created a display component which reads that number from the state using the useSelector hook. And I've wired up some buttons to dispatch actions to my store to increment that counter. So that's all pretty cool, but I think we can do something slightly more exciting. So the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that I have two more components here called emoji counter and emoji selector. So here we have a component that pretty much takes a count and an emoji and then repeats that emoji a certain number of times. So that's pretty basic. And I've got another component over here which allows us to set that emoji. So I'm going to create another slice of my store. So it'll create a new file called emoji.js. We'll do all the same stuff again. So we'll import create slice from Redux Toolkit. We'll do a new slice of state. Name will be emoji. Nice and simple, nothing fancy. Initial state can be, ooh, now I have to pick a random emoji. I think this says a lot about what's going on in the world right now. I've got the working from home emoji. I've got the whale, which I use for Docker, the shrug, death, and a mask. I'm going to go for sparkles because it's nice and positive. Now let's give it some reducers. So I'm only going to have one reducer, and that's just going to be set emoji. So we'll call that set. And that will basically take the state and the action that we dispatched to the store, and it's going to return action payload. So whatever is in the payload of the action is going to set that into state. And we'll export that. Okay, and we'll bring that in here. So, emoji. Very lazy. Okay, one more thing that I need to do. I need to create a selector. So this isn't necessary all the time, but it does just make things a bit easier. So we'll create state emoji. Just really stupidly, that will return whatever we've set to that slice of state. Okay, so now if I go back and look, here we go, counter emoji. So let's add in that bit of state into our emoji counter. So this is no longer taking any props. We'll just import use selector from React Redux. So this is basically the same again. I'm going to get the emoji, const emoji equals use selector and get emoji, which is being exported by my slice. We'll do the same for count because we want the count as well. No, it didn't automatically. There we go, get count. Okay. So now this should, once I refresh the page. Ah, I forgot to mount the component. That always helps. You need to do that. Emoji counter. There we go. No props. Don't need them. And there we go. So we can see the state changing over here. And we can see these changing on screen as well. Fantastic. Last thing to do. Let's add this emoji selector. So we're no longer using local states. So we can scrub all of that out. We'll import use selector and use dispatch because, you know, this is a control form, so. Okay, so emoji selector, we want to create a new dispatch function, equals use dispatch. We'll initialize the value to whatever we currently have in state. Okay, and now we just need to change what this does. So we're going to have it dispatch our action creator, which we defined in emoji slice. So emoji slice.actions.set, and then we're going to give it the value of the text box in this component. I just need to import emoji slice. So default export. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. So I need to mount it. I need to remember to mount it every single time. Okay, so let's add emoji selector just there. And oh no, I did that slightly wrong. So I'm just going to change this. Okay, now I should be able to create some volcanoes. There we go. Pretty cool. So that's pretty much it for the demo. I've created a store in very few lines of code, created a counter, created a reducer to handle the counter, created a slice to handle some emojis, and then I've mapped it into my application really, really simply and really, really quickly. So let's just compare these two really quickly. Traditional Redux with Redux Toolkit. Traditional Redux, there's a lot of boilerplate. There's a lot of code you have to do to make it work, even slightly. It's time consuming to implement because of the boilerplating, but also because it has a very complex structure. Like I'm sure you've all seen at some point folders of action creators and a folder for constants or enums, a folder for reducers, and then it's just everything's spread everywhere. The Dux pattern goes some way to fixing that, but it's not really enough in my view. And all of that makes it hard to read. So what about Redux Toolkit? Oh, it's also fragile. Forgot to mention, very fragile. If you break one thing, everything breaks, and it can be very hard to diagnose. Redux Toolkit, Minimal boilerplate, as you've seen, very few lines of code required to make it work. It's quick to implement. It's incredibly streamlined. It's very easy to read, at least for me, I've been looking at it long enough. And it's much more robust. It does a lot of the fiddly bits for you, so it's more difficult for you to break something. So let's just ask ourselves that question one more time. Is Redux dead? Redux is an incredibly powerful tool with a rich ecosystem and years of high standing in JavaScript land. It solves application state in a solid, performant and easily testable way, and it provides us with fantastic debugging tools, excellent mechanics for middleware, and most importantly, it's utterly ubiquitous. Like, context is great, it provides a good solution to the prop drilling anti-pattern, and in terms of global state management and complex and data-rich applications, I just don't feel like it's quite on the same level. So, one last thing. If you were umming and ahhing about whether or not to learn Redux, I would recommend learning it, because if we're being pragmatic about these things, if you get a job with a company working on React apps of any size and vintage, there's a pretty solid chance they're using Redux already. That story about me staying up late trying to learn Redux only to find I'd done half of it wrong, that was absolutely true. I didn't throw my laptop in the canal, but I was so frustrated with this arcane black magic of Redux as a relatively new developer that I almost gave up. And that was nearly 4 years ago. If context had been an option then, I probably would have, and I'm glad that I didn't, because Redux plays a really important role in our apps at ThirdBridge, and I've grown to love it over the years. It is my go-to library for complex state management. It isn't 2016 anymore. Redux doesn't have to be the line count doubling monstrosity it used to be. But I want to leave you with just one final thought on the phrase, is Redux dead? I have a communications background. I have a BSc in Media and Communication Studies, which is obviously essential for any software developer, of course. Headlines are extremely important in the media. You can encode lots of meaning in a headline, and they are very useful at prompting behaviours, but they can also be quite stupid and quite simplistic. There's an old maxim in communication circles, which has come to be known recently as Betteridge's Law, and it goes something like this. Any headline that ends in a question mark can usually be answered by the word no. So, is Redux dead? I'm going to leave that for you to work out.